How did you manage as a collegiate athlete with Crohn's before finding functional medicine? What was that like?
It really was my pride and my gumption and my grit that just kept me going. And we can all relate to that. We as humans are performers in life, and we learn to just kind of put duct tape over those little blinking lights. The body is incredibly resilient. You can push your body so hard and it will do phenomenal things for you. But when you do that, you turn struggling into suffering.
The 6 levers of metabolic health. Please tell us all about it.
You have to learn how to eat before you can do anything challenging to the physiology like fasting. If you don't filter your environment, you become the filter. Our thought patterns can actually change our biomarkers. I see it as human superpower to say, wow, I can intervene in perceived threat. That's one of the main sources of adrenal dysfunction.
Hello and welcome back to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast. I'm Dr. Emmie here with my wonderful co-host, Melissa Gentile. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Ellie Kempton. As the founder of Simply Nourished and a functionally trained dietitian, Ellie Kempton is dedicated to empowering women to reclaim vitality across the decades. At her core, Ellie is a lifestyle architect, guiding women back to alignment within their bodies. Leveraging her breadth of expertise, she simplifies complex health information, making wellness accessible. As a biochemist, Ellie's transformative approach to care is rooted in cutting-edge science and catalyzed by human-centered grace. Through her one-on-one, her online membership, The Table, Ellie promotes her mission to install agency into her audience to sustain care well beyond intervention. In this episode, Ellie will dive into her personal journey with Crohn's disease and how it led her to explore the science of habit formation in applied psychophysiology. We'll also explore her unique approach to metabolic health, focusing on what she calls the 6 levers of metabolic mastery. If you've ever wondered how to optimize your health, regardless of life stage or hormonal changes, Ellie has the answers, and we can't wait to learn from her. Ellie, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I have to know, we teased a little bit there on the intro, but how did you manage as a collegiate athlete with Crohn's before finding functional medicine? What was that like?
Oh, I didn't manage. That's why I'm sitting here today, honestly. I learned early on. I learned as a little girl to treat my body like a machine. And I know we can all relate to that process that humans maybe endure, where we start to feel these blinking lights on our body's dashboard. Maybe one day it's bloat, maybe the next day it's fatigue. I had symptoms of GI distress when I was 4 years old, and I just learned that it was okay. I learned that it was normal. And even though, of course, it wasn't, and I just felt like I could cope, especially because I had a high pain tolerance and I was an incredible athlete. I was competing at the age of 4. I swam my way into University of Virginia, swam at Olympic trials, full ride scholarship. So it really was my pride and my gumption and my grit that just kept me going. And we can all relate to that. We as humans are performers in life, and we learn to just kind of put duct tape over those little blinking lights. So I have nothing to say be proud of in the way I treated my body. I definitely pushed it very, very hard. And it really was a sliding door moment for me. Really, the reason I'm sitting across from you is because of that diagnosis and because of the decision I had to make on how to treat it.
And as someone who's overcome all these significant health challenges through your diagnosis, through, like you say, putting duct tape over all these symptoms and kind of learning that was your normalcy, like, how do you view discomfort and disease as a teacher now? And like, what has that taught you about your own resilience or even just the body's natural resilience in general?
Oh, great question. In my own journey being punctuated by just suffering and struggle, it really has set the tone for how I work with other humans. And when I'm asked what I do, I rarely describe myself as a dietitian. I usually describe myself as someone who helps humans not suffer, because what it taught me was that the body is incredibly resilient. You can push your body so hard and it will do phenomenal things for you. But when you do that, you turn struggling into suffering. And that is something that I don't believe humans should endure. And so I approach the suffering from the lens of food and lifestyle design. But before I just intervene, before I just get in there and try to do the work and fix the issue, I first try to understand how the human sitting across from me is suffering. What is it that they feel that they may not even know that they're feeling because they've suppressed it for so long? And how much belief do they have in their capacity to release the suffering? That's a piece, and that's admittedly why I'm back in school, is to understand how to help humans believe in their own agency, believe in their own self-efficacy and their capacity to break that pattern. Because we all know what it's like to have that dialogue of like, I don't know, can I do that thing? I don't know. This is just me. This is just my story. I've always had bloat. I've always gained weight. I've always fill in the blank. And your body listens to every thought you have. And so I think the big thing for me was learning to listen to my thought patterns, understand that they can be changed, and the pattern that my body's showing can actually be changed as well, despite any genetic predisposition. And then also, I learned through my story to help the human sitting across from me or listening to my message really understand that the script can be changed no matter how big the degree of suffering is. It can be changed.
And not only can it be changed, but it has to be changed. Because if you just try to go through the motions of a healing protocol or a meal plan or, you know, whatever you prescribe for that individual, it's not going to work if their belief patterns are not in alignment with them thinking that they can or can't heal.
Precisely. And that is where cutting edge science meets human-led grace. I learned to be an incredible robotic dietitian. I learned early on, despite my story. I just told you this phenomenal story about navigating the psychology of suffering. Well, even when I became a dietitian straight out of school, ready to take on my career, ready to heal humans, I didn't know how to pair cutting edge science, these healing protocols, these, you know, kind of textbook answers. I didn't understand early in my career how to pair that with human psychology, with a human who has many bad experiences trying to change and lots of narrative around what's possible and impossible. And so about 6 years ago, I started to feel frustrated by just the return rate of clientele. They would come back into the practice, head hung low, saying, I don't know what's wrong. I fell off the bandwagon. I need you to help me get restarted. And I thought, dang it, why couldn't this protocol that's so fleshed out, the 5 R's, you name it, whatever functional medicine protocol you have in your back pocket, I had probably taught it at some point. And yet I was teaching it to a human. I wasn't teaching it to a robot. And so that's really what I am deeply committed to, is this pairing of the medicine that's evolving and shifting and so cutting edge with a human who has so many idiosyncrasies to their day. No day is perfect. There's so much just wabi-sabi essence to people's day. One day it looks like this, the next day it looks like that. So we have to be aware, especially when we talk about topics like metabolic health, hormone health, gut health. What is this person navigating that's going to help empower them to believe they can keep doing this, because we're accommodating their lifestyle, we're accommodating their ecosystem, the people they live with, their work environment. How are we making sure that we're pairing those protocols with the human and the environment that's sitting in front of us?
I can really relate to this on a personal level with my whole journey with diving into nutrition and health and wellness and everything I've learned over the last decade of my life. Is I remember when I first started, we were talking offline earlier, I started in a dietetic program in college. And I remember like 5-10 years ago, I was so left brain thinking and everything was black and white and nutrition was everything. And as long as I just like knew everything about food, I was going to be super, super healthy and I was going to change the world and, all this stuff. And then you start to realize that like how you move and how you eat aren't the only two factors that play into how you live your life and the status of your health. And it ends up being so much more than that. So I can't wait to kind of dive into this when it comes to metabolic health.
That's just it. And I think that because we live in what Dr. Aviva Romm would call an infodemic, this isn't getting easier. This is not, you're not going to wake up one day and somebody's going to filter the information that you're being given, right? You're not going to be given just enough to feel competent and confident. So equipping our listeners and equipping the people we serve with this filtration system, taking in information through the lens of what's plausible and through the lens of what their body is telling them it needs, I believe is the next step forward in cutting edge medicine.
I have to say, Ellie, you mentioned wabi-sabi, which I believe is a Japanese concept of accepting imperfection and the dynamic flow of our day-to-day. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's my understanding of it.
That is my American understanding as well. I probably overuse it because I'm so in love with the concept, but yes, wabi-sabi is perhaps the theme of my life.
I only knew it as an interior design style. This is the first time really hearing it in more of a lifestyle here. Concept.
I'm glad you brought that up though, because and I do think about art, Melissa. I think about the imperfections in pottery and kind of the bumps and curves, and I love that. And you're applying it to kind of everyday life and learning how to accept that, Ellie. I imagine this applies to your work in applied psychophysiology. And before we jump into the science of that and how it relates to forming healthy habits, I'd like to know, was there a mentor for you, or do you have one now who helped you get to where you are? Because you've gone through so much with the Crohn's and your athleticism and your practice. And I'd love to know kind of what was, and I'm sure it's every day it's different and you have ongoing inspirations, but was there a person or was there a moment that really helped you along the way?
Too many to name, but I do have a few that come to mind. I have a tribe of mentors. I love mentorship, and for young, maybe fledgling dietitians who are looking to start their practice, and I've mentored many of those. When they ask me what to do first, I say, get a designer and get a tribe of mentors. You need to have your brand out there so polished and cohesive, and you need to be mentored along the way. I would say, really my first mentor very obviously was my swim coach. He was a father figure to me. He walked me through just the ups and downs of the performance psychology and, teenage psychology mixed with the performance psychology. It's a recipe for disaster.
Sounds wild.
Yeah. You never want to go back, believe me. But he just was patient and kind, and he invited me into his life as a human and not just a robotic athlete. And I experienced quite the opposite when I was swimming in college. So having had that root system already planted and very resilient, I think I weathered collegiate athletics really well, especially D1 collegiate athletics. So that was my first mentor. And then, the tribe that I have now are women. My best friends are in their 60s, and they are women who have walked through the extreme sport we call life. And they have taught me how to remain compassionate and how to remain kind and how to remain receptive to all the abundance that a career has to offer, all the abundance that someone's success under your care has to offer. I think something we forget as practitioners is we get so focused on helping someone accomplish their goals we forget to help them encode their wins along the way, and we forget to encode their wins along the way. I've noticed that, especially recently. I have missed out. I've bulldozed my way past opportunities to fully celebrate. And as one of my mentors, BJ Fogg, would say, tiny habits that enable you to celebrate success are the number one reason that you can sustain success. And as you said in my bio, I'm not just about the intervention. I'm so much more just committed to and laser focused on how can somebody sustain this well beyond intervention. So longest story short, I would say it started off with a coach who taught me how to be kind and strong, and then a tribe of women who are just absolute killer lady bosses who have taught me to be compassionate and receptive to abundance.
And kind to yourself, I imagine, came through.
Your journey tends to be the most powerful journey you can teach. So because learning to be kind to myself and because learning to be compassionate amidst really, really high standards for success were kind of my biggest hurdles, I find that those are the things I can teach most eloquently to, because I'm on the journey right beside the client I'm sitting across from. I'm holding their hand because I'm holding my own hand on that journey.
So beautiful, and it makes perfect sense. Okay, so Ellie, can you talk to us about applied psychophysiology and how does that relate to forming healthy habits?
Yeah. So applied psychophysiology is really looking at the intersection between the mind and the body, looking at how our psychology actually impacts our physiology. Dr. Bruce Lipton is maybe one of the more proficient, recognized name in this world. Looking, he was at the head of the medical center at Stanford for quite a while, and he was the first to really publish research in the realm of looking at how our thought patterns can actually change our biomarkers. And that is the most, dare I say, magnetic topic to me, because when you look at somebody's capacity to view something as a threat versus view something as not a threat and intervene there, all of a sudden you have another toolkit at your disposal when you're healing the physical body. So instead of looking at it as possibly a bigger can of worms to unlock, I see it as human superpower to say, wow, I can intervene in perceived threat. That's one of the main sources of adrenal fatigue or adrenal dysfunction, is looking at somebody's perceived levels of threat, walking into a situation and believing it's more stressful or less stressful than it is. That's power that humans can take back. So I always knew that I was going to go into some realm. I've always wanted to go into research. It's been I read research instead of novels. We'll just say that. So I knew that I wanted to really expand research and really contribute to it in a meaningful way. And for years, I didn't know how. I didn't know what that looked like. I knew, just being a specialist in women's wellness, I knew that I wanted to contribute to women's initiatives, since there's so much less research on women's health than men's health currently. And then really it was my frustration that catalyzed the choice to go back into school and study applied psychophysiology. My frustration around what I described earlier, where even the perfect clinical protocol did not breed the most perfect outcome. And the bridge between the two really had the most to do, from my perspective, on the psychology of change. So then, of course, true to form, this is my style. I do nothing in gray. I dive into the deepest well I can find. I just started to just devour research on this psychobiology of looking at how does our psychology impact our physiology, and what I found to be, and what I plan on focusing my research on next year before I defend it in my dissertation the following year, is the role that agency plays in sustaining weight loss in women over the age of 40. Because not only is there a huge research gap there, tremendous, it's a gaping hole, but also that's the pain point I see often in practice. I see these women so successful, so confident. They just bound out of my office after our time together. And then it's the sustainment, because I believe in them, but do they believe in them? And if you break down the definition, the working definition of self-efficacy as first defined by Bandura and Bandura's theory, it's really the confidence in your capacity to be successful. And I have goosebumps head to toe as I say that, because when humans are confident in their capacity to be successful, game on. That translates to every realm of everything. I just happen to be really curious, which is why I'm so excited to produce research on this in self-efficacy's capacity to sustain a weight loss initiative. And now in this terrain, in this ecosystem that we live in, where weight loss is maybe being catalyzed by medication and other initiatives that we now understand and can grapple a little bit better, where's a human's capacity to then believe they can keep that going? Because if the intervention is successful, which it's becoming more and more successful, my big question is, what's next?
I guess the burning question here is, how do we get to that confidence level?
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
Is it journaling? Is it affirmations? Is it just forming healthy habits? So it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, right? If you can sustain the habits, you build the confidence. How does it all work? There's a lot to unpack here.
Well, there's a ton to unpack. How much time do we have? I love this. So
wish we had the whole
there's
day.
a few things. Yeah, I love it. There's a few things going on here that have been proven, and I think will continue to be proven to build self-efficacy. And it's really interesting you asked me about mentorship, because one of the first ways to build self-efficacy is to be mentored by people who are doing what you want to be doing. Just like babies who watch their mom do something for the first time, that is the first indication to them that they can do it. And so having a group of mentors that emulate and execute what you want to be doing is number one. If you are surrounded by people who seemingly can't do what you want to be doing, if you're surrounded by people who tell you all the time that they can't lose weight, you will actually emulate that behavior. You will find yourself accidentally saying, gosh, I just really struggle with weight loss. I mean, I was actually at Pilates this morning. It was really interesting. I was listening to this little darling gaggle of women who were talking about weight loss before the holidays, very openly, like right in the middle of the Pilates studio. And one of them just said, oh, I just can't get that extra 10 pounds off. And the other woman goes, yeah, weight loss has just been my lifelong curse. And it just went on and on and on. And I thought, okay, that is the perfect example of a group of women imprinting on one another. But conversely, you hang out in an environment where, women are talking about how successful they've been at fill in the blank, you will find you already have a seed planted that you might be successful too. So that's number one. Number two is self-efficacy comes when you do the tiniest version of it successfully. So let's say you want to learn how to cook carrots. I'm going to make an abstract example. So you want to learn how to bake carrots. You've watched someone do it before, so you kind of know that it's possible. You've even watched them enjoy it. So you're like, ooh, it must be good. I kind of want to do that. So you put your hand at it. Well, you will lose self-efficacy if you decide for the very first time to bake carrots for 20 people, because it will be overwhelming. You might get the temperature wrong because you're now scaling the recipe, and that takes a little bit of talent. And you might just feel fatigued by it and maybe even give up halfway through chopping bags of carrots for 20 people. But if you decide, I saw that woman bake carrots and enjoy them. Let me make some for me, just a single serving, and see how that tastes. And you successfully do it. That in and of itself is the biggest catalyst forward, and we'll call it the springboard to you wanting to do it again, is if you do the tiniest version successfully first. So baking 2 carrots, enjoying them, savoring them, and almost doing such a small version of it, you're dying to do it again. You're like, oh, next time I want to bake 4 carrots. So again, very simple example. I hope some of you are giggling as you're listening to this, because truthfully, a giggle-worthy example is going to be memorable, but
Yes.
right, baking carrots. But I say that because we often see what we want to be doing and we try to do the hardest version of it first. We try to optimize before we even find the trailhead. And that really infringes on the psychology of self-efficacy, because the next time you go to do it, you already expect that you might not be able to do it. And so as Bruce Lipton writes about in his amazing book, The Biology of Belief.
I love that book. It's amazing. It's one of my favorites.
Truly, it changed my career. What you believe is true. So the second piece to self-efficacy and agency is doing the simplest version of a habit successfully. And then anything else, any other variation is cherry on top. Don't ever move the milestone. I'm giving that advice to myself right now.
I was thinking this. Yes,
exactly. And then the third piece, and it's so cool that we've actually already touched on this. It's like we planned it. Celebration. If you celebrate that you did it successfully, boom, reward circuitry in your brain just lit up like a Christmas tree, and you are going to proudly prance your way into the next time you do it. But if you bulldoze your way past that celebration intervention, it's just as hard to do it the next time. So it's almost like you have to, start from stop again. Whereas if you celebrate, you're already in second gear and you go to third. And it feels childish, perhaps. The biggest pushback I get from my clients, I get these like crazy looking side eyes when I tell my clients to celebrate the fact that they, floss their teeth. But what I tell them is, when they celebrate, like you would a little kid, like do a little happy dance, or, as I think it's Mel Robbins would high five herself in the mirror, whatever it is that gives you that little boost of like, yes, I did it. All of a sudden, so many cogs are clicking into place to ensure that you are more likely to do it again next time. There's this subconscious piece then, the piece that you don't even have to think about, that's on your team for next time when you celebrate.
You're really speaking to me, Ellie. I think I could listen to you all day, because I find myself kind of just glazing over successes and without celebrating. It's like, what's next? Well, what's next? Or, proceed to doing it bigger. Like, can I roast 2 pans of carrots now, right? And do it for the big party without the celebration. But, and as my boyfriend always reminds me, you have to sharpen your axe, right? Trying to cut down the tree with a dull axe, it's not going to get you anywhere. You're just losing time. So you have to invest in yourself in those little moments of celebratory moments. So I'm so glad that you reminded me of this. And it makes perfect sense. It can just be a small thing. And if it propels you forward, it makes more sense than just to jump to the next thing, because you might be actually losing ground in that way, is what you're saying.
Precisely. And, I think it's possible. I don't want to sound pessimistic in that you're not going to be capable of roasting 2 pans of carrots every time. You can. I wholeheartedly believe you are capable. I know you are brilliant. You have so much grit and capacity. But do you want to use it all on 2 pans of carrots? Like, do we really want to use it all on that?
Walk before you run. It doesn't hurt. Even though you can run.
Yeah.
Some people shouldn't jump into just running. I know some people who are, they have no lean muscle mass and it hurts. I mean, I speak from experience before weight training. If you start a running program,
shin splints.
Yes. Shin splints, Melissa. It's awful.
Precisely. So whenever I get pushback about this whole celebration of the tiniest of milestone, I just bring focus onto another species. I usually talk about dogs and say, okay, if you were training a puppy, darling little puppy, imagine the cutest puppy you've ever seen in your life. You were imagining it that you were training it to sit for the first time. First of all, it'd be very unrealistic to imagine that it would sit and lay down and roll around and then stay on the very first time that you're asking it to sit. So we can't imagine those things about ourselves either. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you can really heavily, slightly abuse this puppy by just saying, sit, and push its butt down and just make it sit. It will sit. Or you could reward it into a seat and make it want to do that again. The Pavlovian response is real. And if you reward a puppy to sit, it's going to look up at you and be like, yes, okay, I'll do it again. So both puppies sit. But do you want the abused puppy or do you want the happy puppy? And so anytime that I am poo-pooing the opportunity to celebrate, I think, oh, Ellie girl, you're a puppy. Allow yourself to be rewarded for sitting. Like, allow yourself to relish in that treat that, is well-deserved, and treat being anything like a walk out in the sunshine. You bet I'm going to be celebrating after this podcast that we had an incredible conversation. I'm not just going to move to my next thing. And that is going to make me want to be on a podcast again. But if I just bulldoze past this awesome conversation, move on to the next thing, it's just one more thing that kind of used my capacity. And I did it, but am I completely spent at the end of the day, having done everything, having done all the puppy tricks and not been rewarded for it? Or am I that happy puppy who's done all the tricks and bounding with energy because I've gotten treats every time I've sat?
Yeah. And you want to do it again, and you want to maybe do it bigger or do it differently or more creatively or whatever your heart desires.
Exactly. So that visual really helps me. I think anytime we can relate to something we give unconditional love to, like a puppy, it helps. And then it translates to that unconditional kindness to ourselves.
And before we move on, Ellie, I just want to sum it up because this is so practical the way you walked us through it, and I want to retain it. And for our listeners, so the first one, to build this confidence, find those mentors so you can see this reflection of what you want. And then, oh gosh, help me with two. Yep. 2, start small.
Bingo. Yep.
Baby. And then celebration.
And then 3 rewards. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Well
this
done.
Is good. It's hard for me. We have these big lofty conversations, and for me to walk away from a conversation with 3 different things is rare. So I'm thrilled already.
Good. Well, I know I often will just give what I want. And so sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm like, okay, give me the cliff notes. So I love that we pampered ourselves on that one. We have
Yes, as we should. Okay, so let's jump into the 6 levers of metabolic health. Please tell us all about it.
Yeah. So similar to just having cliff notes, I think a topic like metabolic health is so overwhelming. I mean, I'm sure that you've had so many patients who, get their eyes glaze over, I'm sure, when you're like, let's work on metabolism. And I know that's been my story. Being a dietitian, of course, 90% of the women who I serve, in some capacity, whether they name it or not, we need to do work on metabolic health. Whether I see that in their blood work, I see it in their microbiome. We're looking at those ratios of species and we're saying, oh, wow, metabolic health could be improved if we looked at these species. And again, eyes glaze over. They're like, I have no idea what you mean. Just make me feel better. And yet when you say the word weight, people are like, oh yeah, metabolism, weight, yes. But in taking notes on this whole scenario where metabolic health confuses people and a lot of people just want to lose weight, I now describe metabolic health very simply. I describe it to my clients as the song of the cell. The cell takes in information from your food and your environment, and it makes something useful out of it. And that's how I describe metabolism, because you and I both know there are thousands of things encompassing in that story of taking in information and creating usable energy from it. But all of a sudden that makes sense. And I hear it come back to me. They'll come back into my office a few weeks later and be like, remember how we talked about the song of the cell? I've been thinking about it. And like, I know it's making sense to them when I describe it like that, because people need to understand that it's not just food. Metabolic health is dependent on your environment, and it's dependent on your detox processes. It's dependent on so many other things. Then to take it one step further, I've broken metabolic health into 6 levers, because that helps my client understand that when they feel stuck, or when they tell me my metabolism is broken, even if I've described to them, well, the song of the cell can't be broken. It just needs to probably be fine-tuned. But even if they come back to this realization, if they're gaining weight, or weight stagnation is usually what makes them think their metabolism is broken, I lead them gently back to this idea that there's no such thing as brokenness, but maybe there's a lever that isn't complementing the other levers. I kind of like to describe it like a bank vault. And it's like, we got to make sure you're pulling on all the handles of the vault to make sure it spins. And when they understand it like that, boom, reclamation of agency. They're like, oh, I can do that. And I'm like, yes, you can do that. So I show them a map which gives all 6 levers. And you're welcome to put that in the show notes, that just identifies for them which lever perhaps maybe they haven't tugged on in a while, or not even tugged on. Maybe they haven't even touched it. It's a dusty lever. So the 6 levers, and we can hone in on whichever one you're feeling most drawn to. But the first lever is just the timing of when you consume food, and truly like how you orchestrate your meals across the day. And a lot of people forget that when we eat matters almost as much as what we eat, but when we eat matters. And historically, sunlight used to dictate when we would eat, but now we ignore that. So timing matters. The microbiome matters. The microbiome plays a huge role in metabolic health. And me being able to describe that to someone re-empowers them to look at it. I'm running a whole series this month on teaching my audience how to nurture their microbiome specifically for metabolic health. Another facet of the metabolism that I think often gets overlooked is cortisol regulation. I don't know that people quite understand the connection, and I love making that for them. And down from that is blood sugar regulation, because cortisol impacts blood sugar so much. It's really fun for me to be able to show someone, either just through describing, what cortisol feels like, or even showing them their cortisol panel, what impact that also plays then on their blood sugar. So there's 4. The 5th is drainage and detox. Drainage and detox is, 100% overlooked. Liver health, lymph drainage, lung, everything that releases metabolic waste, I think needs our care in this day and age where we live in an environment where we become the filter. If you don't filter your environment, you become the filter. And so I see that as a big point of intervention that's really empowering, because it's tangible things you can do. And then the final piece, which somebody would expect me to talk about, but I usually don't talk about it first because they've usually been beaten over the head with it, is nutrient repletion. Making sure they're actually eating enough of the basic foundational nutrients for metabolic health, starting with protein. And that's really empowering once they've done some of the other things that are so approachable.
So Ellie, when we think about metabolic health, I like to always two big things come to mind for me that I really wanted to ask you about. So one of them was fasting. The second one was caffeine. And I feel like these kind of tie into a couple of things you just mentioned. So the first one that you said was timing. So I want to hear more about meal timing and kind of what your thoughts are about fasting, especially for women.
Right. And talk about the infodemic we're in. Maybe a few years ago, all my clients wanted to do was never eat. The 1 meal a day trend was big. And now
still out there. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And then now with Stacey Sims being as vocal as she is, which I love. Now my clients are coming in being like, okay, how can I eat protein within 30 minutes of waking up? So it's definitely shifting quite a bit. And I have just, I'm always happy to change my mind, and I do change my mind quite a bit, and I'm very vocal about when I change my mind, especially when science changes. But this is a topic I have yet to change my mind on, and I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are on this. I never teach fasting until I teach feasting. I will not teach someone to walk away from food until they know how to eat food. So nutrient repletion, even though timing of food may have seemed, as I recommended, or I mentioned it first, so thinking, oh, timing of food, maybe concentrate my food window. No, be consistent about your food window. When you break your fast and when you close up close the food window, that tells your body it's safe to know that it's going to have access to food across the day. So you have to learn how to eat before you can do anything challenging to the physiology like fasting. And for women's physiology, I'm very protective of women when they're in the perimenopausal years, kind of early 40s into early 50s. That's a time where there's already a bunch of challenges because the hormonal landscape is shifting so drastically. It doesn't feel right to me to throw another wrench in that. It doesn't feel right to say, okay, your estrogen is going to be really high one day and low the next. Why don't you fast? It's hard to know. But if somebody's hormones are relatively stable, we've looked under every rock that could maybe be a contraindication to fasting, what I will gently recommend, and this is probably more for the psychology than it is physiology, is a really, really gentle, like 18-hour fast to reset the body, but only once they know how to feast. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a really great perspective. I mean, I know fasting's been such a huge trend and it's very controversial, especially with women and women's hormones. But I like that approach because I think preserving thyroid health is also important. Like, we don't want to see those things tank. We don't want to see cortisol spike and progesterone drop. And then all of a sudden there's this cascade of events that are going wrong in your body. So I really like that approach.
Yeah. It just feels, like it lands in a space that's more intuitive than logical to my clients. I can tell when something lands intuitively, there's this softening to it. There's this receptivity to it when I say, let's make sure you know how to eat before we take away your food.
And it kind of ties into what you were saying earlier. Being an athlete through college, you had this kind of like power and grit. And when I think of fasting, that's like forcing something upon the body that's challenging and hard and tough. And I feel like, especially with all the adrenal burnout that's out there, because of our lifestyles and how stressful our careers are and all the other things that go into our whole life, like I feel like we could kind of benefit from that softening and safety sense of feeling that you get when having 3 meals a day and not having to push your body beyond limits and like ignoring hunger signals and all of that. So it kind of ties into the whole conversation.
And at the end of the day, the body, it will tell you exactly how it feels about these things. So what I will often do is pose these things as an experiment. I'll say, okay, let's experiment with a day where you break your fast with the most abundant breakfast. You have a really good, nurturing dose of protein. You pair it with some good anti-inflammatory fat. I just kind of build out this like idyllic breakfast. And that's usually where the meal I punctuate the most when I'm going to ask someone to play with not fasting. And I just say, okay, break your fast with that, and then eat again when you're hungry, and then eat again when you're hungry. Come back to me, tell me how you feel. And don't, no bias, just tell me, what was your energy? How's your gut? How's your cognitive clarity? What did your body tell you? Just give me the whole download, and no pretending. And then I'll say, okay, now let's do the opposite. When you're hungry, don't eat. Okay, you're hungry again? Don't eat. Okay, you're hungry again? Don't eat. And come back to me and tell me what improved, what felt better, what, was your energy better despite being hungry? Did you have more cognitive clarity despite being hungry? And, when it's posed like that, and there's an experimental kind of playful stance, then curiosity leads the way. And curiosity gives the client the information they need to make an empowered decision that's theirs. What I often find people doing is fasting or eating in a regimen that somebody told them to, set, a book or a practitioner or whatever, but it's still that person's plan. It's not the client's plan anymore. It's like, well, this book told me to do this thing. I'm like, well, you're not the book. Mm-hmm. So what's your plan? What's your monogram plan? So, I'm not in the no fasting camp, and I'm certainly not in the, just no structured, feasting camp. I'm right squarely in the middle, where I think they complement each other well, but in a scenario that's wholeheartedly monogrammed by the client who's doing it.
And what are your thoughts on caffeine, especially for women's hormones, cortisol? I need to know it all.
Oh, this is a great topic, specifically for former athletes. I use caffeine as a performance drug, obviously. I mean, there's so many benefits to performance with caffeine. And what very similar to my stance on eating and fasting, I really have to take into account the environment that the caffeine is being consumed within and the pattern in which the caffeine has been consumed. So if somebody comes to me and their pattern is to drink 3 or 4 cups a day across the day, and no adherence perhaps to a noon curfew or anything like that, I would actually, and I'm very happy to get your guidance on this as well, but I would actually think I'd be abusing them to take them away from caffeine very abruptly. Not only because of the endocrine disruption that would entail, because their body has been so dependent on that caffeine to uphold that cortisol curve, but also just because I would create so much suffering in that client. So I think it's really important to take all of that into account. My rule of thumb for adrenal health and mental well-being is to identify the number of milligrams of caffeine you're consuming and stay well within body pound, the amount of milligrams per body pound. So however much you weigh, tailor that to however many milligrams of caffeine you're consuming and try to stay below that. So if you
it's a good guideline.
Yeah, it's very manageable for clients. They feel like, oh, okay, now not only am I aware of what caffeine I'm consuming, but now it becomes a game to stay below that and to see how good I feel staying below that. And you can bet on the fact that I'm also giving a ton of replicas. So mushroom-based coffees that nourish their adrenals. And right now I'm really hyped up on this coffee called London Nootropics that's L-theanine and coffee. And it's so great because it kind of weans them from that punchy high that they get. The L-theanine stabilizes their nervous system. So I give lots of ways to get down to that. And then once I get within that window of staying below your body weight in milligrams of caffeine, all of a sudden they release their grip. I have these sessions with clients where they're like, when I do that and I'm drinking some of the other things you have me drinking, these adaptogenic drinks, I sometimes forget to drink my coffee. And I'm like, there you go. That's
the goal
of freedom, right? So I think on the other side of suffering is freedom. And you have those kind of moments where you're like, wow, that thing I was dependent on and I couldn't live my day without it, forgot about it. That's freedom.
It's funny because I remember one of my first nutrition classes in college, our professor, I remember her teaching us just stay under 450 milligrams and you're good for bone density and, whatever. That's a lot of caffeine, especially, that's a lot. So, and I did like the point you brought up about, someone is taking in a lot of caffeine throughout the day, not cutting that cold turkey. That's a hard thing to do. I did a 3-month caffeine cleanse. This was years ago now, where I went, I was abusing it every day. I was having, maybe coffee twice a day. I cut it cold turkey. I was miserable. It was not a fun experience. And I remember Yeah, it wasn't a fun experience. And I feel like now when I try to take caffeine breaks, it's more like, can we reduce it or bring in these adaptogens or switch to matcha and be a little bit more gentle about it than just ripping something like that out of your system overnight.
Well,
It's
exactly.
aggressive.
It's very aggressive. And the body, to me, the scarcity mindset behind that translates to other inflammatory patterns physiologically. What are you going to turn to fill that gap? Who knows? I mean, for me, it would be sugar, 100%. And is that abrupt removal worth it to the long-term maybe reason that you took caffeine out in the first place? If the reason you took caffeine out was to nurture your adrenal glands, and yet you're pounding your body with something else to make up for it, did you make progress towards that long-term goal? I don't know. I think that there's a one step forward, one step back on that. So going back to the architecture of success, if we think about watching someone successfully drink, moderate levels of caffeine, that would be like asking a colleague at work, like you notice that they're drinking tea, and asking them what their favorite tea is, asking them, what their journey has been like to not just drink coffee, really taking in that modeling. Then maybe you have just as much coffee as you normally do one day, but you pair it with tea and see how that feels. And then you're successful with that. So that's that tiny success. And then really at the end of the day, or even when you're drinking your tea, fully giving yourself the biggest braggy pat on the back ever for bringing tea to work, or pairing your coffee with tea so that you'll be more willing to do it again tomorrow. It works so magically.
Ellie, do you have a favorite tea?
Do I ever? Yes. I have boxes up in this bookshelf of all my favorite teas. My clients call it my little Mary Poppins bookshelf because I just pull out all these crazy things. I love the tea company Rishi, Rishi, no affiliation. I just love them because of how they're sourced, and their compilations are so intelligent. They have this one called Reishi Mushroom Hero. So cool. I actually just gave a client one yesterday to try with their coffee, this exact conversation. And it's reishi, of course, but reishi tea on its own doesn't taste that good. And I want someone to luxuriate in the ritual, because a habit that has meaning is a ritual. So when I give somebody this tea, I describe all the other things in it. There's astragalus in it, and there's cinnamon, and there's cardamom and cloves, and all these other lovely things in this tea. So all of a sudden you think you're drinking this like elixir of goodness. By the way, it's your medicine. And by the way, it's your new timeout from emails. It just becomes a thing. So yeah, back to my favorite tea company. Love Rishi. I think it's a really, really conscious company. And I'm so old school, and this comes from my time at Bastyr University, where, we were sipping from the most natural medicine Kool-Aid. I really like the company Organic India. It makes Tulsi.
Yes,
and
I love them too.
Yes. I remember before exams, they would just fill these jugs of Tulsi tea in the hallways. And
that's so cool.
Isn't that cool?
That's really
so
cool.
Gently calming.
Of course, with sprigs of rosemary. So we'd have that mental stimulation. Bastyr trained me well. But yeah, I think that as old school as it is, I think that brand does Tulsi tea right. And that's such a great adaptogen, as you know.
I'm a big tea drinker myself, or, I'm a tea, I should call myself a tea collector, because I love to collect them. And then I'm always reaching for like coffee and matcha, and the tea just kind of sits off to the side. But you're kind of inspired. I have some reishi actually tea here. You're inspiring me to probably go make a few cups of it here. But Ellie, thank you so much for your time today and all of that you poured into the conversation. I think you bring such a unique perspective that we often don't get to hear every day, kind of in the medical, even the functional medicine realm over here. So if any of our listeners like tuning in today really resonate with your messaging or want to connect with you, where can we find you online?
Yeah, you can find me at elliekempton.com or simplynourished nutrition.com. That's where I hang out. I feel like when women and humans come together to heal, there's some magic that happens. So I love to create space for people to come together. So I'm always hosting lots of community-driven initiatives so that women can hear each other's story and women can model to each other that agency and feel celebrated by one another. So you'll find all my happenings on either of those sites.
Yeah, we need to eliminate this idea of separateness. I feel like, community is something we have definitely lost. Do you do events in person or online? Just curious.
I do most of my work online. Yep. I have a membership called The Table, and it has just a wonderful group of well over 100 women who come together every week. Actually, my other colleague and dietitian, Emily, and I teach a class every single week to them on a topic of wellness. So for each quarter, there's a different topic. Right now, we're going into gut health, and that is just really an ode to the gut. We teach people all about plumbing. We teach them exactly what's happening from the top to the bottom and how we can nourish and heal the lining of our gut, but in baby steps. We teach week by week for 12 weeks how to heal the gut. And those are all online so that women can find it and make it an approachable part of their life on the go.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much, Ellie. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. And to everyone tuning in today, until next week, wishing us all vibrant health and wellness.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guest and host are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.